It's after midnight, August 6, 1988. A young woman is driving home from the county fair. Her name is Jane Borowski. She's 22 years old, and she's 7 months pregnant. She spent the evening at the Cheshire Fair up in Keene, New Hampshire. Now she's headed home, alone on a dark stretch of Route 10. It's hot. She's thirsty, so she pulls into an empty lot, a little country grocery store called Gomerlo's. It's closed hours ago. The windows are dark. One light is burning on a tower above the pavement. She feeds her change into the soda machine out front and then gets back into the car. And that's when she notices it. A Jeep Wagoneer pulled in, parked right beside her, real close, and in her rearview mirror, she watches the driver get out. He doesn't head for the store. He walks around the back of her car. He steps up to her open window and he asks her a question. Is the payphone working? Before she can answer, he grabs her door. He's trying to drag her out of the car. She fights, and the whole time she's fighting for her life, this man is talking to her. He tells her she assaulted his girlfriend, and he asks if she has Massachusetts plates on her car. She tells him no, New Hampshire. She's never seen this man in her life. Doesn't matter to him. By the time it's over, Jane Borowski's been stabbed 27 times, wounds that should have been fatal, and then he just stops. He climbs back into the Jeep, and he drives out into the dark. Jane's still alive. She manages to pull herself back into the car, and somehow she actually starts driving. She's injured, and she's headed to a friend's house a couple miles up the road. As she looks up, she sees a vehicle on the road ahead of her. It's the Jeep. He's still out there. She makes it, people come running, somebody calls for help, and as they're getting her inside, that Jeep rolls back past the house, slow, like he's making sure. Then he's gone. Jane Borowski lived through that night, and so did her baby. They were lucky. A number of other women were not. She got a look at him, she gave the police a sketch and the first 3 characters of his license plate. It wasn't enough. The man in the Jeep was never found, and what happened to the women who came before Jane? That's not good. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. This is the Connecticut River Valley Killer. Stay with me. 10 years before that night in the parking lot, October 1978, a different town, New London, New Hampshire, up near Lake Sunapee. Her name was Cathy Millican. She was 27 years old. She graduated magna cum laude with a degree in art history. She studied a semester in London, Phi Beta Kappa, had a certificate in ornithology, the study of birds, from Cornell. She painted. She was into photography. She was a serious bird watcher. And she was a competitive sailor, good enough that she had her eye on the Olympic team. Now that fall, she started a brand new job, a small publishing house called Addison House out of North Wilmot that put out photography books. She was there about a month. Her boss said that she took to it like a duck to water. On the afternoon of Tuesday, October 24th, Cathy left the office and headed home to Sunapee, but she made a stop along the way. There's a quiet little nature preserve sitting right on that route, the Chandler Brook wetland just off Route 11 in New London. Cathy loved it out there. Birds, water, the light coming in low in the afternoon. She had her camera with her. Now, other people in the preserve that day saw her moving through the wetland, taking her pictures. Her brown Volkswagen was parked near the entrance. That was the last time anyone saw Cathy Millican alive. It was about 5 in the afternoon. When she didn't come home that evening, her husband Charles started calling around. Her office, anyone who might have known where she was. Late that night, he called the New London police. Now, the next day, she still didn't turn up, so they brought in the dogs. It was a state police trooper named Gary Quint, working a bloodhound, who found her. Found her late the following night, a few hundred yards off the road, back in the woods of the preserve, just steps from where she was taking her photographs. Cathy had been stabbed to death. Now, New London wasn't a place where this kind of thing really ever happened. The police chief said that the last murder in town was in 1964. People didn't know what to do with it. A local man floated the idea that maybe a bear got her, and people wanted that to be true. A bear was easier to live with than the alternative. Turns out it wasn't a bear. What followed was one of the biggest investigations the area had ever seen. 11 investigators, 7 days a week. They interviewed hundreds of people. They parked out on the road by the preserve and stopped cars at random just to ask folks what they'd seen. They ran computer printouts on every vehicle in the state that matched a small, light-colored car that somebody spotted near the scene. And after all that, it led nowhere. No weapon, no motive named in public, no suspect. Cathy's murder went cold. And in October 1978, there was nothing to connect it to. There was no pattern, no string of cases, no name for any of it yet. Just a brilliant young woman gone in a bird sanctuary in a town that hadn't seen a killing in 14 years. Cathy Millican was the first. For almost 3 years, Cathy Millican's murder sat by itself. One terrible thing happened once in a quiet town. Then the woods started giving people back. July 1981, a 37-year-old woman named Mary Elizabeth Critchley was hiking through the area. Friends called her Betsy. She never made it to where she was going. That August, her body turned up in the woods near West Unity, New Hampshire. She was out there long enough that the medical examiner couldn't even determine how she died. Now, at the time, nobody linked it to Cathy Millican. Different town, different year, no obvious thread, so it got filed away. Then came 1984. May 30th, West Claremont, New Hampshire. A 17-year-old named Bernice Courtemanche. She was a nurse's aide at the county home and a junior at the local high school. That afternoon, she set out to hitchhike over to Newport to see her boyfriend. She never got there. 6 weeks later, another woman was gone. July 1984, Ellen Fried, 27 years old, a nurse at the hospital in Claremont. Now, late one night, Ellen stopped at a little store called Leo's Market to use the payphone. She called her sister out in California, and the two of them talked for a long time, just catching up. Somewhere in that conversation, Ellen mentioned something. There was a car. It kept rolling through the parking lot, around and around again. And at one point, she set the phone down, she walked over to make sure her own car would start, and then she came back. They kept talking. Eventually, they said goodnight. The next morning, Ellen didn't show up for work. Her car was found on a back road called Jarvis Lane. The doors were locked. Her purse was still inside. They searched for 10 days. Dogs, aircraft, people on foot. Ellen Fried was just gone. A year later, it happened again. July 1985, Eva Morse, 27. A single mom from Charleston, raising a daughter, working at a box factory, trying to get back on her feet. That day, she went out to the side of Route 12 and put her thumb out. She was never seen alive again. Then they started finding them. September 1985, skeletal remains turn up in a wooded stretch of Kellyville down near the Sugar River. It's Ellen Fried, found 8 miles from where she left her car. Then, in the spring of 1986, it happened twice in 1 week. April 19th, a fisherman near Sugar River finds remains off a road called Cat Hole. It's Bernice Courtemanche, missing almost 2 years. She's been stabbed. 6 days later, April 25th, loggers working the Unity Woods find another body. It's Eva Morse, also stabbed, and she was lying just about the same patch of forest where Betsy Critchley was found 5 years earlier. None of these women knew each other, but look at what they shared. Young, traveling alone, last seen somewhere along the same stretch of the valley, and every one of them ended up in the deep woods near the water. At the end of April 1986, investigators pulled together a task force to take on all of it at once. 5 of them full-time, chasing as many as 20 leads a day. Now, by the fall, that task force quietly shut down. They hadn't connected a single case. They hadn't solved a single one. Now, back up 2 weeks before the loggers, before the fishermen, before the task force ever sat down, April 15th, 1986, across the river in Westminster, Vermont, a house on Route 121 on a road between Saxton's River and Bellows Falls, sat by itself, woods on one side, the river on the other, no neighbors close enough to hear a thing. This is where Lynda Moore lived. She was 36 years old. She grew up in Brattleboro, married her husband Stephen in 1971, 2 kids. Christopher was 12, Allison was 10. She ran the office for Stephen's contracting business. She helped start the program that got infant car seats to new mothers at the local hospital. She was a mom who showed up. The ski program, school musicals. On the afternoon of April 15th, Lynda was out in the yard doing some cleaning around the house. Stephen was at the job site. The kids were at school. The last time anybody saw Lynda Moore alive was about 2 in the afternoon. Roughly an hour later, Stephen came home. He found his wife inside the house, in the living room. She was gone. The state medical examiner, a woman named Eleanor McQuillan, she ruled it a homicide. Lynda was stabbed 25 times. There were signs of a violent struggle. Lynda fought back, but the doors weren't forced open, and nothing in the house was taken. So not a burglar who got surprised, more like somebody came up that driveway in the middle of the afternoon and walked right up to her. Police started knocking on doors, and then they got something. More than one person remembered a man around the Moore property that day. Stocky, dark hair, clean-shaven, round face behind dark-rimmed glasses, a blue knapsack on his back, and young, maybe 20 to 25 years old. Police turned that into a composite sketch, and if you've ever come across this case before, that sketch is probably the face in your head. And according to later reporting on the case, that man was eventually identified and cleared. So the one image everybody remembers led nowhere. Now look at what we've got. Lynda Moore didn't fit the profile. She wasn't a hitchhiker. She wasn't out alone on some road at night. She wasn't picked up and driven off into the dark. She was unalived inside her own living room in broad daylight, doors unlocked, and nothing stolen. And privately, a lot of investigators didn't believe a serial killer did this at all. And yet, that same spring, the New Hampshire Attorney General, Stephen Merrill, pulled together a task force. The assignment: take 8 unsolved killings from up and down the valley, lay them out side by side, and answer one question. Was there a serial killer working the Connecticut River Valley? Lynda Moore was on that list. So were the other women from the woods. So was an elderly woman stabbed in her own home, and 2 unidentified men. Merrill wouldn't rule anything out. He'd only say they were troubled by it. And a profiler named John Philpin sat down and built a portrait of the kind of man who could have done this to Lynda Moore. We're going to circle back to Philpin. He matters here. Meanwhile, back in Westminster, people were scared. Folks who never locked their door in their lives were locking them now. The inn over in Saxton's River sat half empty. People just wanted to be home before dark. It's been almost 40 years. No one has ever been charged with unaliving Lynda Moore. And the people who work these cases still can't agree on the most basic question of all: whether she belongs on the list at all. It's January 1987, the middle of a snowstorm. A plow driver's working the northbound rest area off Interstate 91 up near White River Junction, and there's a car that's just sitting there, a green BMW. The door's cracked open, snow blowing in, there's blood inside, and there's nobody around. The car belonged to a 38-year-old woman named Barbara Agnew. Barbara was a nurse. She worked over at Dartmouth Hitchcock and lived across the river in Norwich, Vermont. Now that day, she'd been skiing with friends up at Stratton. She was driving home in her Storm on 91, and she stopped at the first rest area, and that's where it happened. Somebody took her right off the public interstate in the middle of a snowstorm. Her ski jacket turned up, pulled off, and stuffed in a dumpster nearby. Then, nothing. For 11 weeks, they searched and came up with nothing. It was the dead of Vermont winter. Then, March 28th, the snow finally starts to melt back. A woman who lives out in the back road called Advent Hill goes for a walk with a few friends. The snowbank shrunk down enough just to see over the fields. And 89 feet off the road, under an apple tree, she sees her. It's Barbara Agnew. She'd been stabbed, she fought back. And the place they left her told investigators something. Advent Hill in winter is about the loneliest road in Heartland, Vermont. The plow barely runs it. For 3 or 4 miles, there's not a single house with anybody living in it. To leave Barbara up there in January, the killer drove a treacherous, snowed-in back road that almost nobody would dare to take in a storm. He came within a quarter mile of where he left her. He pulled into a driveway, turned around, and he went back down the hill. The tracks he left behind looked like a Jeep or something else with 4-wheel drive. Whoever he was, he knew this country, and now investigators thought they finally had the thread. Barbara Agnew was a nurse, Ellen Fried was a nurse, Bernice Courtemanche was a nurse's aide. Maybe that's it. Maybe he was hunting medical workers, a former patient maybe, somebody carrying a grudge against hospitals. And they took it seriously enough to act on it. Police went to the hospitals over in Brattleboro and told them to be careful. Nurses were warned to watch themselves walking into their cars at night. It felt like the key, and then it came apart. Because Cathy Millican worked in publishing. Lynda Moore ran her husband's office. The pattern looked so clean a second ago, and it just fell apart in their hands. And then it got murkier. Barbara Agnew's body was found about 5 miles from a spot where, a few years before, another body turned up. A 16-year-old girl from Heartland named Heidi Martin, also stabbed. And in Heidi Martin's case, there was a confession. A young man named Delbert Tallman told police he did it. Then he took it back, and a jury let him walk. So was Heidi Martin one of these? Was Tallman involved? Maybe neither. Nobody could say. The case just kept opening doors it couldn't close. By now, 2 states had bodies on their hands. So Vermont and New Hampshire finally did the thing that they should have done a long time ago. They started to work together on it. Up to 16 investigators, 2 states, and the FBI. The lead detective in Vermont was a man named Ted LeClaire, and the profile that they were building kept landing on the same unsettling idea. This wasn't some drifter passing through. He likely lived here, probably within 30 miles of every single place they found a body. A year in, LeClaire had so little to go on that he was down to printing up flyers. He said to a reporter, there was a man out there hunting women, and they needed to watch themselves, especially after dark. He was close, he was local, and they couldn't find him. Then in the summer of 1988, he surfaced one more time, and that time, his victims survived. For 10 years, he'd been careful. He took women who were alone, in the dark, where nobody would see, and he never once left a living witness. Jane Borowski changed that. She survived, and that made her the single most valuable person in this entire case, because for the first time, somebody looked at this man in the face and lived to describe him, and she gave the police a lot. A man, white, blonde, somewhere in his 30s, around 5'8", heavy set. They worked it into a composite sketch, and they pushed it out everywhere. She gave them the vehicle, the Jeep Wagoneer, and she gave them something a witness almost never can, the first 3 characters of his license plate. Now think about that. After 10 years and all those women, they finally had a face, a truck, and a portion of a plate. This was the break. Except something about Jane's attack didn't sit right. The other women were taken in silence. They were grabbed and gone. This man talked to Jane. He accused her of assaulting his girlfriend. He asked her if her plates were from Massachusetts. Now, to investigators, it read like mistaken identity, like maybe he had her confused with somebody else. Or was this even the same man? Or did Jane Borowski run into someone else entirely in the same summer in the same valley? And here's where it gets really tangled up. She wasn't the only pregnant woman attacked that summer. About a week before Jane, a 36-year-old woman named Sharon Johnson, also pregnant, left work and never made it home. She was found at a construction site over in Bedford, New Hampshire. She'd been unalived. 2 pregnant women, days apart, same state. Investigators jumped on it. Had to be connected. Turns out, it wasn't. Sharon Johnson, they concluded, most likely knew the person who did it. Different situation, different motive. Police said that there's no evidence that the same man did both. So that thread died too. And that license plate, the best single lead in 10 years of this whole thing, well, 3 characters just wasn't enough to land on one car. Not with the Massachusetts question muddying it all up. The one thing that should have ended it all ran out. And then, after Jane Borowski, the killings stopped. No more women on the roadside, no more remains in the woods, nothing. Whoever he was, he just went quiet, and nobody knows why. Maybe he died, maybe he got locked up for something else, maybe he moved on, or maybe it was Jane. Maybe the man who never left a witness finally left one, and it scared him into hiding for good. Now, Jane Borowski could have vanished from the public life after that. Nobody would have blamed her, but she did the opposite. She told her story over and over for decades, on podcasts, to reporters, to anyone who'd listen. The one who lived became the one who wouldn't let this case die. And for years later, Jane would do something that cracked this whole thing wide open. She would look at a photograph of a man and say, "That's him. That's the one." And then years after that, she'd take it back. By the late 80s, investigators had more than they ever had. A survivor, a sketch, a vehicle, a piece of a plate, 2 states, the FBI, and now a profile. Remember that profile? The one that kept insisting that the killer was local, hiding in plain sight? That was the work of one man. His name was John Philpin. Philpin was a forensic profiler out of Vermont. He spent a career crawling inside the heads of people who did monstrous things, and he worked these cases from the inside while they were still happening. His read on the killer was chillingly ordinary. Organized, careful, patient, a man who could pull a woman off a dark road and then go home and mow his lawn. Somebody you'd never look twice at. Philpin believed that the case could be solved. He never let go of it, not for decades. But here's the wall the investigators kept hitting. They had 2 composite sketches of the man that they were hunting. One came out of the Lynda Moore scene. A young guy, early 20s, dark hair, round face, dark-rimmed glasses. The other came from Jane Borowski, a heavy-set blonde man pushing 40. Put those 2 faces side by side, and they aren't the same person. They're not the same age, they're not the same hair color, not the same build. They're not even close. So what does it mean? Either one of those sketches is dead wrong, or there was more than one man out there. In 1991, the case went national. Unsolved Mysteries, Robert Stack. They reenacted Jane Borowski's attack for the cameras and beamed it into the living rooms across the country. The tips poured in, and not one of them broke the case. Now here's where it gets genuinely confusing, because there was a man, a real one, who fit these crimes almost perfectly. His name was Edwin Town. Town was a twice convicted SA offender, and his pattern was straight out of these cases. He'd find a woman alone on the road, often along Route 12. He'd force her into her car, and he'd drive off into a remote spot in the woods. That is the Connecticut River Valley playbook. And Edwin Town, he was free and roaming around these exact woods when Eva Morse was taken. Investigators looked hard at him. A Claremont detective named Michael Prozo said that Town's name sparked some interest. And then the calendar got in the way because when Ellen Fried and Bernice Courtemanche disappeared back in 1984, Edwin Town was already locked up, so he couldn't have taken them. So either Town wasn't the Valley Killer at all, or Town was just one predator and there was a second one working the same roads at the same time. And that is the thought that's haunted this case from the very beginning. What if the Connecticut River Valley Killer was never just one man? What if that single terrifying name got draped over the work of more than one predator, and they're all hunting the same lonely stretch of New England? The mismatched sketches, the cases that don't fit, a convicted predator free for some time of it, and behind bars for the rest? Nobody could prove it was one killer, and nobody could prove it wasn't. And the one tool that might have settled it all didn't exist yet. This was the 80s. The kind of DNA testing that cracks cold cases today was still years down the road, so the leads dried up. The task forces wound down. The killer, whoever he was, went quiet after 1988, and by the 90s, the Connecticut River Valley Killer was a cold case, a ghost story, an Unsolved Mysteries rerun until it wasn't. A dying man in a hospital bed decided to tell his uncle a secret, and that secret had a name. Fall 1997. Almost 10 years after Jane Borowski, almost 20 years after Cathy Millican, a man named Gary Westover, he's dying. And as he gets close to the end, he asks to talk to his uncle. Now, two things you need to know about Gary Westover. First is that he used a wheelchair. He wasn't physically capable of overpowering anyone. The second one is who his uncle was. His uncle, Howard Minnan, was a retired lawman, a man who spent his whole life on the other side of a confession. And what Gary Westover told him from that hospital bed was this. Years earlier, some men he knew came and picked him up for what they called a night of partying. They loaded him and his wheelchair into a van, and that night, Westover said he was there when they took Barbara Agnew. He said he watched it happen, and he gave his uncle the names of the men he said were responsible. Think about that. A dying man just put himself inside the abduction of one of the Valley victims and named the others. And what did the old lawman do? Exactly what you'd hope. Howard Minnan wrote down every name, and he carried it straight to the authorities. And then, nothing really happened. The names went somewhere into a file, into a drawer. The men Westover named were never arrested. They were never charged. As far as anybody can tell, they were barely even pursued. In 1998, Gary Westover died and took whatever else he knew with him. In 2006, his uncle, the one man who'd written it all down, he died too. And that account, a claimed eyewitness to the Valley abduction with names attached, very nearly died right alongside both of them. Now, was it real? Maybe it was just a dying man's story. People have made up deathbed confessions that turned out to be nothing at all. But the profiler John Philpin, the man who lived with this case for years, looked at what Westover said and found it credible. And eventually those names clawed their way back to the surface. The account made it to Barbara Agnew's family, and from there to a private investigator who wouldn't let it go. And one man on Gary Westover's list stood out from all the rest. A man who was already dead by the time anybody came looking. A man with a history so dark that once you hear it, you'll understand why so many people became convinced he was the answer. The man investigators and reporters would come to call the prime suspect, Michael Nicolo. So who was Michael Nicolo? Start with the one thing that isn't in dispute. On the last day of 2005 in Tampa, Florida, Michael Nicholaou unalived his wife and his stepdaughter. And then, as police closed in, he unalived himself. That part is fact. Whatever else he was a man capable of exactly this. He was a Vietnam veteran, a helicopter pilot, and by every account that outlived him, a violent and frightening man. And those 2005 killings is what dragged this whole case back into the light, because there was a private investigator down in Florida named Lynn Marie Carty. Carty didn't set out to solve the Valley murders at all. She'd been hired years before to find a missing woman, Nicholaou's own common-law wife, who vanished in 1988. 1988, the same year the Valley attacks stopped, and the deeper Carty dug into Michael Nicolo, the more the pieces seemed to line up. Let me lay them out for you, because at first, it looks airtight. 1. Jane Borowski's attacker drove a Jeep Wagoneer. Michael Nicolo owned a Jeep Wagoneer. 2. Gary Westover, on his deathbed, named Nicolo as one of the men who took Barbara Agnew. 3. His wife vanished, and the killings stopped the very same year. And 4. This is the big one. Carty showed Jane Borowski a photograph of Michael Nicolo, and Jane looked at it and said, "That's him. That's the man who attacked me." The survivor naming the suspect to his face in a photo. Case closed, right? Not so much, because then it all started coming apart. Jane Borowski took it back. Today, she says she does not believe that Michael Nicolo was the man who attacked her, and she says the private investigator pushed her into that identification in the first place. The single strongest piece of evidence against him was the survivor pointing at his photo, and the survivor walked that back. And it gets worse for the theory. The people who actually work these cases don't consider Michael Nicolo the answer. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit said it doesn't even believe that all these murders are connected in the first place. And state police have said outright that Nicolo wasn't a serial killer. His whereabouts during the earliest killings are disputed, and there isn't one piece of physical evidence tying Michael Nicolo to any of these murders. Which brings us to the question hanging over this entire case, the DNA. For years, people have said that there's crime scene DNA on a file from these killings. And if that's true, then somewhere there's genetic evidence that was never compared to Michael Nicolo. But even that isn't clear, because the profiler John Philpin, the man who was actually there, said that the usable DNA may never have existed at all. That if police really had it, they would have said so. Right. Either there's DNA that could end this and nobody ever ran the comparison, or there was never any DNA to run in the first place. Either way, the one thing that might have given these families an answer never happened. So was Michael Nicolo the Connecticut River Valley killer? A private investigator believed it. A dying man's account pointed at him. He drove the right vehicle, and he proved, in the worst way imaginable, what he was capable of. But the survivor says no. The police say no, and there's no evidence that says yes. Michael Nicolo died December 31st, 2005 without ever being charged for a single one of these murders. So, you tell me. So now where does that leave us? A prime suspect is dead and was never charged. We have a survivor who took back the only identification anyone ever made. 7 women are gone, and nobody was held accountable for any of it. You'd think a case like this just fades away? Maybe, but this one didn't. In 2024, investigators tried a tool that cracked open so many cold cases lately. Genetic genealogy. Building a family tree out of crime scene DNA. It proved no viable leads. Then in May 2024, something happened that turned every head in the valley. The cold case unit, the state police, the local police, they all descended on a property in Newport, New Hampshire. Evidence containers, biohazard markings, a search that ran for hours. Officially, the Attorney General's office would only call it part of unresolved homicide cases. But Jane Borowski told reporters she'd been informed it was about these murders. Nothing public has come of it yet. And then this past October, 47 years almost to the day after it all began, the cold case unit went back to New London, back to that quiet wetland off Route 11. The same patch of woods where a young birdwatcher named Cathy Millican was found in the fall of 1978, the very first victim. And in the fall of 2025, investigators were out there again, still looking. When that search happened, Cathy's family asked the world to remember who she really was. Not a case number, not victim number 1. She was an artist, a photographer, an ornithologist, a national sailing champion. So let's do this. Let's say their names. Cathy Millican, Mary Elizabeth Critchley, Bernice Courtemanche, Ellen Fried, Eva Morse, Lynda Moore, Barbara Agnew, and Jane Borowski, the one who lived. Jane could have spent the better part of 40 years trying to forget. Instead, she spent them making sure nobody else does. She's telling her story, pushing investigators, speaking for the 7 women who can't speak for themselves. Somebody did this. Maybe it was one man, maybe it was more than one, maybe he's been gone for years, maybe he's still out there, an old man now, somewhere within 30 miles of those lonely roads who got away with it all. We don't know. And until somebody does, the Connecticut River Valley killer is still out there, unnamed, unsolved, unfinished. He's a ghost in the most beautiful corner of New England. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.